Hello, America. Dave Hodges here, host of The Common Sense Show. We are the show freeing America one enslaved mind at a time. And we're kind of alternating our hip shows, hiding in plain sight with public availability and then what's on our TV. And I'm trying to get people used to the idea that these are things worth looking at and encouraging our government and where we have influence with people, our local colleges, universities, to do real work on what I'm going to talk to you about right here. And you can see what the topic is. This is real. This is not a joke. And you can't find anything in scientific literature worth its salt with proper population sets, proper scientific techniques, pre and post comparisons of different time frames. You can't find anything that says that what I'm going to tell you is incorrect. In fact, quite the contrary. And I had to walk through the process myself as a researcher deciding what I would present here on my show. I had to walk through and say, okay, is this good research? And then a lot of times I'd have to go talk to people who would work in the area, whether it be archaeologists digging up data or whether it would be just me gathering data myself with 500-year comparisons, millennial comparisons, like 1,000 years, 10,000 years. And all that goes into in this, and that research exists. And it's interesting. The guy that really covered this the best when this started to really surface for people like myself who weren't working in the fields, wasn't involved in scientific research at the university level in these areas, that you could go and find data and say, yeah, there's cause for concern here. And this is not controversial. It's just the other side doesn't want you to know. But the evidence is omnipresent. And I've come across some data sets again, some of it out of Arizona State University, and they tend to bury anything that they don't like. But because they're being publicly funded with government grants, some of this stuff is readily available, but you have to go hunt it. And because I have experience at that level, I know where to look. It's kind of like I ask uh, a grave digger, "Where's that body buried?" Okay, sometimes it takes that. But anyway, I want to get into what this is, what it could look like in the future, and can we put any time frames on a pole shift? That's really, really, really the key here. Now, we are brought to you by a great product, series of products I absolutely love. And if you look here, I got the wristband on for energy today, and oh boy, did I have a tough weekend. I had a lot of other outside responsibilities I had to take care of, and I'm working today on about 5 hours sleep, and that's the best I've had in 3 nights. And I'm one of those, I never sleep 6 hours, and I never have, even as a kid. I drove my parents crazy, took me to the doctor, thought something was wrong, and they just said, Mr. and Mrs. Hodges, you just got to accept the fact that your son's brain chemistry is a little different than most people. His circadian rhythms are off. He has normal REM because I did a sleep study, but his other stages are fairly rapid. And he goes through the same cycles you do in the night, but he goes through them a little quicker. Yep. So I was always a little bit of an oddball, and you're going, oh, I knew that. So it's kind of an advantage, and you had to do all-nighters in college for finals. That was an advantage. I used to drive my parents crazy. Go to bed. I'm not tired. And then I'd be up at 3 in the morning reading stuff or doing whatever. And um, what are you doing? Shut that light off and get to bed. All right. So this energy band is fantastic. It's from Body Align. So you see here that they have a whole litany of products. Um, I don't need the sleep patch, but there are people that do. And it does help straighten out your sleeping rhythms. And I've tried these treatments. Oh, don't ever use anything narcotic. I mean, I suppose if someone was in a crisis and they had really bad trauma for whatever reason, I could see 1 or 2 nights of treating with barbiturates, but nothing beyond that. Um, you can see the wellness band there, bottom left, and then you have the EMF defense, and that's your cell phone with the round dot on the back of it. And what it does, it's going to help people get around the threats of your cell phone with the 5G, the EMF, and there is a protective mechanism, and it's scientifically proven. And you can dig into this when you go to Body Align, ALIGN, bodyalign.com/Dave Hodges. These products are absolutely fantastic. This natural fast pain relief product of theirs too. My friends swear by it. I've got it waiting in the wings, but praying I'll never need it. But people tell me that when they've had to use it, it's same. These people are very professional. They're very scientific. Stuff works, and it's why these products always are in a state of selling out. I mean, they're high demand. And I came across the EMF defense because people are just telling me, like Virginia Farber, who's been a guest on my show, she won't own a cell phone. And she goes, Dave, I see you sometimes. I know, Virginia, but I'm busy. Okay, well, I have the protection I need now, and you can too. Go to bodyalign.com/Dave Hodges. Okay, back to the topic of pole shift. Love the pole shift topic. Don't love the event. I've mentioned this before on air. It was earlier in this century. All the North American runways had to change their true north reading that they navigate with their GPS settings to land planes and take off. They had to adjust that by 1 full degree. That's a big deal. And that means that your planet is going through a pole shift. And when we're moving, 1,700 miles an hour through space, rotating at about 1,000 miles per hour, we absolutely, it's gravity that holds us in. But these forces form like a centrifuge. And if you think about a top that you've ever spun, and it begins to rotate on its side, rotate, and then it stops because the shift has taken the centrifugal mass and put it on the ground completely. We won't get to that point, but we've been to the shifting point before. Now, this is where your controversy comes in, and the literature is confusing. Does the planet ever do 180 degree? It could. It depends on external factors, coming with the sun gravitational, other bodies, would a celestial body come close enough to change the Earth's trajectory without crashing into it? There are scenarios that I've read about scientifically, and they're more hypothetical than they are laboratory expressed. But what we could have is a 180-degree shift. If that happens, there'd be so few survivors on the planet, if any. Um, I don't know that the evidence supports that that's ever happened. What we typically get to move into an ice age is you get into a mini ice age first. We've been through that. Back in the early 2000s, when I would occasionally have a foreign exchange student for one of my in-person classes, and they'd be from places like Russia, Germany, Sweden, the UK. We had a lot of Europeans, Australians even. And I heard from all of these young co-eds that their professors in these countries were saying things like, well, here in Europe, we're some going to have to move to Africa because we're going through a pole shift. And they had the most dire winters. And this goes back 15, 20 years ago, but they had the most dire winters that they had ever experienced. And I asked them to person, do you have professors and like geology professors, meteorology people? Are they saying the same things? And I used to take statements from them. It says, write me up what you've learned so I can go research this. And the message in the European theater was very consistent. Australians were hitting this as well too. Here in North America, it was almost like hear no evil, see no evil. And unless you were listening to someone very knowledgeable like Graham Hancock, you didn't get any of this. And if it wasn't for shows like Art Bell, you would never have known about this. Pole shift. What kind of scientific mumbo jumbo is that? That used to be the attitude. And I said, well, hold on, people. I used to tell my colleagues this, ask your students when you have a foreign exchange student what they're being told. And it was almost universal. It's almost like, oh, I see you're from Moscow. Oh, cool. Had a young girl in class, lovely girl, beautiful, intelligent, polite, very respectful, appreciative of any effort to help her, and probably had about 180 IQ. And she gave me chapter and verse, and she had time frame. She said, "We'll have a cooling off period of this event, but it'll start up again." That's what they were being told. We're in the cooling off period right now, where the change in climate is not quite as dramatic, and man has nothing to do with this crap. The Russians, and I had two of them, none of this climate change BS for them. Okay, climates alter and change, and there are sudden shifts, and your CO2 has nothing to do with it. CO2 is needed for life. In fact, when we've talked about terraforming Mars, this is something Elon Musk knows about, and he's addressed to some degree, but in his early days, he had to temper what he was saying because he didn't dare step on the toes of the global elite with his emerging businesses. And they wanted to promote at that time what they call global warming. And when global warming was found out to be a total fraud, they changed it to climate change in about 2008, 2009. Look up the East Anglia Penn State fraud, outright fraud, admitted in emails that were hacked that they were lying. They were making up data for benefactors to their universities. Penn State, East Anglia in the UK. So let's talk about what a pole shift is and include in there a little bit about what it isn't. A pole shift is a natural part of any planetary body. And there's a buildup of pressure in every planetary body at 19.6 degrees latitude. That's the red line. And when you went back to when we started to have big seismic activity on the planet, and we had superstorms, a lot of them in the Pacific, 19.6, earthquakes, volcanoes, centered around 19.6. When a star goes supernova, it does its damage before it burns itself out, and the emanation point is 19.6. And he didn't discover it. But do you know who popularized this? Richard Hoagland on the Art Bell show. And Art, as a consequence, made him the scientific advisor. And he remained such even when Art was basically forced out for being too good at his job. And Richard was kept on by people like George Norrie until George Norrie forced Richard out because he was talking about the things that got Art Bell forced out by Clear Channel and Premier, and the owners of the shows. Premier One, Clear Channel with George Soros, number two. And what Richard said is, we're starting to go through this. And he would bring in scientists that he'd play clips of on the Art Bell show. This is what first got my attention. And then I discovered Graham Hancock, and I said, I could find nothing in this man's research that isn't correct. There's nothing in there that's based on pure speculation or hypothesis. So when you reach about a 3 to 4 degree level of pole shift, this is where the bad stuff happens. The seismic activity and the continental drift that we know that takes place. In other words, if you look at Africa and South America, you can see where they fit together one day. And you probably even go back as far as what they call Pangea, one big landmass. But there was a split. Now, did that split happen over millions and millions of years, or did it happen overnight? The answer is yes. It happens both ways. We are always seeing a shifting, always, because of the gravitational forces of the Earth and the fact that we have an outer crust and an inner crust. The outer shifts slowly. The inner is like putting a continent on roller skates. And when the outer reaches such a level that it puts pressure on the inner, this is where the bad stuff takes place. Probably the most famous example is 1988 in Siberia. And you had a woolly mammoth that was discovered in Siberia in 1988 that was frozen. And this isn't the only instance of stories like this. And it had undigested tropical vegetation in its system, meaning whatever transported that creature to the environment of which it was discovered happened in less than 30 minutes. That could mean thousands of miles of transport on the outer, or excuse me, the second level crust, moving at unbelievable speeds. Not much survives. It's thought that most of your survivors would emanate along the equator, and society would start over. Now, this is where you get into folklore, and folklore can't be considered to be scientific and proof of anything, except it serves to anecdotally support what I'm telling you. The Hopis call this the fifth and the final word. The fifth and the final. The Chinese, and in particular, the Indian culture, and I'm talking about the country of India, and the Ayurvedic teachings speak clearly to this. I've always wondered too about the nuclear explosion that's been revealed in India with sand as glass, and you have all the other artifact leftovers of what could have been nuclear explosions. Was that one of the causes of near extinction of the earth? We have been there before. You had the dinosaurs. Can't take back that proof. They're omnipresent. Like what they just discover upstate New York? Mastodons. Previously unknown in New York. And they're saying they think they went as far south as Manhattan. Boy, that'd make a hell of a rumble on Wall Street. So what we are looking at here is transformation of the planet in very violent ways. And climate change has zero to do about it. But the geoengineering they're doing can. If you use old Project HARP technology, and if you go to a document, I have it on my website, go to the search engine, Air Force Owning the Weather 2025. I was actually given a copy of this by a signatory. A story I can't really get into because when people are retired, they can be brought back in. I don't think that's going to happen, but I've always promised I wouldn't say any more about the individual's identity than that. It was called to my attention that this could bring on dramatic climate change. And what happens, the technology, spoken very simply, is you beam up electromagnetic waves um, and you can change the weather by moving the jet stream and it gets into the ionosphere. But the other factor is not just weather change and the weaponization of weather, of which, by the way, there are treaties on file in the UN, which are weather war treaties. The International Court of Justice has even dealt with this. We've had one country offer other countries to change their weather for a price. China to Malaysia, bring a cyclone in to cure a really bad drought. They changed their mind because they thought the loss of life wasn't worth it. So we have all kinds of proof for this. But the bad thing is this, and this gets back into the climate change that can be exacerbated and heightened to a high degree. You use the same electromagnetic energy and beam it down on the San Andreas Fault, and you could have the most hellish earthquake ever. There was controversy and personnel changes in the people controlling the technology, and some of them got transferred out and given other positions. I know such a person. Some had their military careers ended. Some people that were working in this with DARPA had their careers ended. And sometimes they'll talk briefly to me, to Art Bell on his show, to other shows, but they usually are shut up. Art got visits from what I called the men in black in the government. You will not cover this. Do you want to know how they got Art Bell off the air? I think you'll find this to be really interesting. Art Bell used to get visits. He called them the Men in Black. It's kind of a takeoff, humorous takeoff on that old term. And they tell him, you need to stop. Art, we're going to interfere in your show. We're going to harass the hell out of you. You're too public to do anything too. That's true. But we will do. But what they got him, here's how they got him. Art was growing independently, but it became an empire that was almost too big to manage. I mean, what was he on? 600 stations, I think, at one time. He had 8 million listeners. And here came a group called Premier. And they said, we can manage all this for you, Art. We can streamline this. And he had a really crappy lawyer, in my humble opinion, where Art sacrificed some editorial control. And it was enough of a gray area that it was used against him. And I don't know if you all remember this. Not, I think it was in the late 90s, and I'd have to go back and research the year. I want to say it was in the 97, 98 timeframe. And this is when I was beginning to have these think tank meetings with Bill Pollock and Vance Davis and these people. And we were bringing in astronauts and scientists and DARPA refugee scientists. And we were comparing notes and trying to build a model for where things were going. Same time frame that Art Bell was taking off. And some of the people that were part of our group were also frequent guests on Art Bell. I have to be careful what I say. Some are living, and I did sign a non-disclosure agreement with consequences. So I've got to be careful exactly what I say here. But one of the things that we talked about, and one of the things that's unmistakably true, is you can exacerbate um, earthquakes of terrible, terrible proportions. And some of the people would not agree to do that with civilian populations, a weaponization against people in a country. Mexico City earthquake in the mid 80s was such an event. That's right. And in that document, Air Force Owning the Weather 2025, it was modeled like what Nick Begich had done in his book, okay, Angels Don't Play This Harp for Project HARP, HAARP. And he listed all the patents. Says, no, hey, you don't have to believe a word I'm saying. The patents tell you what they're doing. Well, they did the same thing on Air Force Owning the Weather 2025, but it was a Black Ops funding proposal, and it was presented in the same genre with regard to this is what we can do. This is for the security of the United States. Other countries are beginning to do it. And if we don't do it better, it's a problem. And they can do it with a number of varieties. Chemtrails part of this too. It's not the only focus of chemtrails or purpose, but it is part of it. But it can be done by space. It can be done by array of antenna like Project HARP. There's a number of mechanisms they use now. Some people think it's just still Project HARP and Gecko in Alaska. It's gone way beyond that, way beyond that. And these documents show you clearly what they're capable of. Now let's go back to pole shift. Can a pole shift be mitigated? Can we develop a technology that could stop that from happening? Well, Michio Kaku, Kaku, and you may have seen him on a variety of shows. He is kind of the intellectual quantum physicist of our day. Brilliant man. Um, he's popularized superstring theory, and mathematically, he's proven out that there's 26 dimensions. And you can control various things by the more dimensional energies that you can channel into the reality you're in at the time. So let's say we're in our three-dimensional reality. If we wanted to time travel, we'd have to master the fifth dimension, time and space, where everything would happen at once and you could manipulate it on a frequency basis. But imagine if you go out to 26 dimensions. He goes through in his book, The Superstring Theory, and talks about a partial on how you would do this. We could harness the energy, and Tesla got into this too. He didn't directly address the idea of pole shift, but he said we could control planetary forces by using this energy that often we dub 0 point. Now, hello, remember I just did a 3-part series on how this government and its black op forces in the deep state will not allow corporations like Enron to access the forbidden physics that we call zero point energy, sometimes grossly inaccurately labeled quantum physics. And they took Enron down because of this. And this isn't the only instance. I'm not going to go down the path of corporate abuse by the deep state for people venturing into areas they should not venture into. I mean, some of the application of technology is really simple. Driverless cars is part of this, but it's a very small part. And look how long it's taken for this to happen. And they're still using the most crude features. And it's almost like they want some of these cars to crash so the public won't demand more of this because they don't want to open up. There's Newtonian physics of 3 dimensions. There's quantum physics, Michio Kaku model of 26 dimensions. And if you could master that, Michio Kaku had his levels of society. He said 95% of all societies in the universe, if there were alien societies, will not survive going from level 0 that we're in to level 1. Level 1, you can control the weather. We're pretty well there. But the next part of this is you control planetary forces. Then the next level, when you get into level 2, you control the solar system and your immediate neighborhood in the galaxy. You could prevent supernovas, theoretically negate the effects of black holes. I believe this is part of what they're doing at CERN. I think there's a real good breadcrumb trail to say that that is exactly what they're doing. They're also doing nefarious, occultic, satanic stuff as well too. I think they're summoning in things we don't want in our reality. That's another topic for another time, because if you go look at CERN and all the characters around CERN, statues, all this, it's very satanic, very satanic. And they are working with hyperdimensional forces. They're even producing many black holes, which I'm very much against. This could really backfire. Now, as a Christian, I know God's not going to let this planet and all life be destroyed on it. In fact, in Revelation, it says no flesh would be left alive unless Jesus returned for the second time. So I take comfort in the fact that that's not going to happen. But I think we should be discouraging this as responsible stewards of our planet. So, pole shift. We are in the beginning of a pole shift. What we don't know is the rapidity of which it can happen. I've given you the 2 models: slow change, quick change, and then there's a combination of the two. The slow change, the climate change people are making hay on this because they're getting people, oh, there's a little difference here. Yeah, you're right. We're wrecking our planet. Stop driving your car. Okay, it's for their own purposes. They want to control all energy. They want to control all power. Therefore, they control all economy. They control all government. It's a power grab. That's all climate change is. It's a self-enriching power grab made by egotistical, evil people. And from my spiritual perspective, they are probably descendants or the minions of descendants of the fallen angels that want to destroy God's prized creation, us. That's my spiritual belief. Scientifically, we can prove the fraud, and it's not hard to say, why do people commit fraud? For money and for power. And we see elements of both. So these are the forces that are at work right now on our planet and the misuse of what's happening to our planet. We should be working on how we mitigate the damage. Can we correct a pole shift? Could we negate supernova effects from the sun that could produce things like the Carrington effect that happened in 1857? Thank goodness it happened not in our time. Otherwise, we'd lose 90% of our planet because it'd have the effect of a global EMP. At the very best, you'd have one side of the planet being EMP'd, but I think it's both sides. I think the effect would be long enough that no one would be spared the 24-hour rotational period with this not going on, if you can follow that line of reasoning. But we're living in times of great change. And I started with a discussion of my former foreign exchange students and what they were saying. Some of them I would have in advanced research classes, and these people were the best of the best. They were some of my very best students, and they all said the same thing. Why is it that they were teaching their students in Europe this 20 years ago, and they're not teaching it even today? It's just like, well, we kind of think, and you get some hypothetical references. And I've had these discussions with people that were my colleagues. Well, Dave, you got a couple of good points. I think you're taking it too far. Cognitive dissonance even rules in the scientific realm. We live in great times of consternation. We live in a time of wars and rumors of wars and plagues. That's why I think pandemic's coming. I think the drones are part of it. I'm going to do a follow-up in a later segment where we're going to be talking about some things that we know now are happening with drones, and you're seeing it on YouTube. You won't see it for long because once YouTube makes the connection and the AI is updated, those channels will be gone. A lot to think about here. Chinese used to say, may you live in interesting times. We live in interesting and frightening times. But the book of Matthew says if you're true to the Lord, he will not depart from you. I think it's very good advice. For your approbation, your consideration, I'm Dave Hodges. You've been joining me here on the Common Sense Show. I'd invite you to join our newsletter, 50,000 strong and over that now, and one-stop shopping, email delivered to you every day with what we do in a 24-hour cycle. So you get 365 of these a year, and people love them because it saves time. You get a lot to consider. I bring in some outside stuff of people that I respect. And then, of course, you get my work like this, and it's all right there for you to decipher. And it's on your email, and you can go back to a few days ago, a few months ago. I have some people tell me, I categorize your work, Dave, and you said this back in October of 2011. That's pretty good. I'm impressed that there's a Dave Hodges library being done by some people. Be my guest. And you've seen too through the years that sometimes I've had to alter, modify my beliefs, and none of us are 100% correct. But I will tell you, with the idea of pole shift, I'm right. Let me leave you with one other factor before I close. At the think tank meetings I used to go to in La Placitas, we were shown the pilot of an NBC show with Charlton Heston that was to have aired in the 90s. And this is just before the effects of dementia really kicked in for Heston. And this guy was one loyal American. Remember, he's the one when Clinton was talking about gun control, and he says, out of my cold, dead hand. In other words, that's how you're getting my gun. He was a good man, but he was the narrator of a show. And they went through the pole change scenario. And he also showed research in the University of Texas that later got scrubbed and saw the video. They found human footprints at the same strata as dinosaur bones. And the implication was humans exist at the same time as dinosaurs? Is this pre-Adamic? It was interesting, but I will tell you what they did show. When you have a pole reversal going on, there's a change in electromagnetic frequencies, which frequencies stimulate earthquakes, weather changes, and so forth. That's the science of Project HARP. Now, you also get aberrations in behavior. Birds fly off course and get destroyed. We're seeing that. Humans begin to experience aberrations in behavior. We are at an all-time high of mental illness in the United States in the data we're keeping. The OCED out of the UN has alluded to this as well too, but they don't really want you to understand what the real cause is. Now, of course, there's life factors, there's genetics with behavior aberrations, but there's something else. Frequency modulation. And we go back to the work of Jose Delgado, 1961, and this is where the science really moved forward. And then Jose Delgado went Black Ops in 1965 and went to work for Stanford Research Institute, SRI, and that was the PSYOP brainwashing MK Ultra division of the CIA at Stanford Research Institute. Still is today. And Jose worked there until 2011. And he said, short before his death, we're doing things we should never have done. Well, I'll tell you what's happening with the pole shift. It's changing the frequencies. And Charlton Heston's show showed this. And you're going, holy crap. Saw it with my own eyes, people. This is going to air in the fall, guys. This was like June. They were talking September. And the powers that be never let it happen because the NBC Nothing But Crap network allowed themselves to be manipulated. And it's just like Art Bell and content control. And I'll conclude with this. When Art allowed this contract to include, they had some input into content moderation. Didn't say, we'll tell you what you can and can't say, but it was enough of a gray area that they could tie him up in court. And his original contract was worth $8 million. It's like $1 a listener. And then Art one day in the 90s just quit. Do you remember that? He came back twice, but he quit. And Premiere was acquired by Clear Channel, George Soros. It got worse. He quit again. Under Norrie, they relegated him to the weekend and really controlled his content. And before he died, he went to alternative broadcasts, and they tried to interfere in that. We own your rights. You can't call yourself coast to coast. Yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Information is power. And right now, most of the American people are ignorant. The Europeans know more than we know. I had a lady on my dissertation team, and she had studied and taught in Europe. She was an American, originally from Colorado Springs, and she had studied and taught. And what she told me, we're talking about UFOs and so forth, and she said they're open and honest about it over there. She goes, here, it's like you're mentally ill and belong in an institution if you even talk about it. She was right. We live in the most controlled media, and YouTube and Facebook are the worst examples. Let's pray that Donald Trump cleans this up. We'll see you back here next time. God bless.